Alright, let's talk about Retrobit. Yeah, Retrobit is a company which I really like, I recommend people look into, but sometimes I'm not always impressed with them. But sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm very impressed with them. And I've been really interested in the Retrobit Generations. Looks like a cool device. The reviews are in from a lot of other people. It looks like it has a really interesting variety of games, but when you get right down to it, the hardware doesn't play the games as well as the original hardware. Looks like an interesting selection of games. Looks like a pretty cool controller. I'm not sure if it's actually emulation, but the emulation doesn't look like it's going to be that great. But due to the controllers and the collection of games, I'm still interested in it. But I'm just not going to rush out and get it. And let's take a look at my history with Retrobit and my opinions on the company. Hello, I'm Joey and I'm here to talk about Retrobit, a company that I think is worthy of great respect and even a little bit of contempt. There's reasons to love and be apathetic towards Retrobit. First off, it's worth mentioning, they are one of the best companies in the manufacturing of anything related to retro video games, except for perhaps the video game software itself, as far as I know, they don't make their own games, but they do make excellent hardware. The problem is, they also make crappy hardware. But just to describe my history with Retrobit, and why I really kind of love them and I really kind of hate them. And why, well, I shouldn't say why. And basically, I think everybody should take this into consideration before they purchase things from Retrobit. But if it sounds like I'm saying don't buy stuff from Retrobit, no, look into what they have. They have some pretty cool stuff if you want hardware for playing old video games. Now, the first thing I got from Retrobit is actually, it'll take a lot of effort for me to root it out, but right in there, there's a Retro Duo. Yeah, the Retro Duo. That is a really awesome Super Nintendo clone, and with it is an adequate, it's not perfect for playing Nintendo Entertainment System games, but it does play a lot of Nintendo Entertainment System games in a separate slot, which actually is really cool. I don't fault it for that very much, because the main focus is on the Super Nintendo side of things. And it's a really great Super Nintendo. It's compatible with the original Super Nintendo controllers, and it comes with some cloned controllers. Actually, I already need them nearby that I can root out. No, because I got a bunch of controllers in here. One of them might have been right there. But unfortunately, it's not. It comes with basically some of the better remanufactured Super Nintendo controllers I ever saw. I shouldn't say remanufactured, copied. And they are pretty good. They're not perfect. I do feel you're better off with the original Super Nintendo controllers over the ones that Retrobit did. But that said, for aftermarket controllers, I was pretty impressed with it. And the one that I got was blue and white. I was debating red and black or blue and white. I like things that are shiny and red, but blue is my favorite color. And I was going to go with red and black. Was basically black with red trim. The red trim would be, like the slot for where the cartridge goes in and such things. But I went with blue and white, and it's a really beautiful Super Nintendo. And plus, you can play a few Nintendo Entertainment System games on it as well. The Nintendo Entertainment side of things wasn't perfect, but that was still pretty fucking impressive. I really, really love the Retro Duo. I think it's a great clone console. And did I notice any differences? Well, they get sound right. And I did notice a slight difference in color. But that said, I often play video games on multiple televisions at the same time anyway. And the difference in color output by the game system is very minor. It's about a same sort of difference you'd expect when you go from one television to the next. Now, if you hook up your video game system to one television, then you hook it up to another television system, there's a tolerance that you say, yeah, that TV is set correctly. But yeah, you can tell there's a little difference. The difference is basically within that margin of error. If you look for it, if you're really, really into Super Nintendo games, you might notice the difference. But it's good. It's fine. And hell, if you think, well, that looks a little more green than it should look blue, you're gonna just adjust the tint on your television. Though I wouldn't do that. It's within a pretty close tolerance to the original. It's good. It's a great system, or at least the version I have. I can't speak for all of them out there, but I love the Retro Duo, and that came from Retrobit. And because Retrobit was making cloned video game systems and making the old hardware, I developed a bit of an interest in them. I like it that there's new hardware being manufactured that'll play the old games. And of the hardware developers, there's Yobo. I also have some of their stuff as well too. There's other developers. At some point I want to try the Retron 5. A lot of people said it turned out to be a piece of crap, but it is unique, so maybe one day I'll get one of those. And a lot of the licensed clone consoles from Sega are actually bad. But that said, there are some clone systems that do the Sega games really well as well. But yeah, that one was my first clone console, and it did Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo games. The bias on which it was designed for was Super Nintendo, but it was good. I don't know how to praise the Retro Duo enough. I loved it. I thought it was great. The next thing I got from Retrobit is the object itself is probably up there somewhere. I could root it out. But the box it came in, I tucked away over here. Oh, it's getting dusty. It's the Retro 2600 AC adapter. Yeah, an AC adapter for the Atari 2600. Originally, I used to play Atari 2600 games by hooking an adapter up to my ColecoVision, which is big and bulky and awkward because the ColecoVision's big, the adapter hooks onto it. And my ColecoVision was becoming temperamental, and I thought, I always wanted an actual Atari 2600. Even though I could play Atari 2600 games already, I kind of always wanted an actual one. So I finally got one off of eBay. I finally got around to doing that. And, well, it didn't come with an AC adapter, but I knew that ahead of time. And I bought one from Retrobit. And it's a great AC adapter. It works. What can I say? Can't complain about that. But no, it was a good AC adapter. They're making stuff like Atari 2600 AC adapters. Super Nintendo compatible controllers that were just like the originals that came with the Retro Duo, stuff like the Retro Duo. Retrobit had my respect. I love Retrobit. Retrobit is fucking awesome. And they kind of are. They really are. They are. Good stuff to say about Retrobit. You bet I fucking have good stuff to say about Retrobit. But is it all wonderful sunshine and rainbows? And you see, as much as I love the Super Nintendo and Nintendo Entertainment System, my favorite game system from the era of the Super Nintendo was actually the Sega Genesis. I loved both game systems. Sega Genesis, when I used to go back and forth between playing Super Nintendo games and Sega Genesis games, the Genesis always had the better controller. It was better for fast reactions when you're picking which button to press. The buttons were closer together but lined up more logically. It had the better D-pad. That's not just the controller, the games too. There were so many Genesis games I loved. There were a lot of Super Nintendo games I loved. And if I were to think of my top favorite games of the era, it would be a pretty good mix of Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games. But when you step away from the top favorites like Crusader Ascenti and Phantasy Star 4 and Chrono Trigger and The Illusion of Gaia, as you start to move away from the absolute top, as you get down to the average games, there was more games that I'd put in the average category that I was interested in on the Genesis than the Super Nintendo. I love both systems. So a clone system that would do both Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo and perfect Nintendo Entertainment System playing. Because let's face it, the Nintendo Entertainment System is often a stubborn video game system to get working part of the time. A lot of people, if they have the old top-loader version, they consider that to be the best version. But yeah, the sliding the cartridges in and so forth, it's not uncommon for people to have a lot of frustration getting the not Super Nintendo, getting the Nintendo Entertainment System to work. It's a stubborn game system. What can I say? So after having a great Atari, or getting a great Atari 2600 AC adapter, and the Retro Duo, which I absolutely love, and it's, if I wasn't going to knock over a bunch of stuff to pull it off the shelf, I'd pull it off the shelf, but I love the Retro Duo. After getting those two devices, the next thing I got was the Super Retro Trio. And I looked it up online, because I had to be kind of careful with my money at this point in time. It wasn't a time when I could just say, I really want that, I'm going to get it now. It had to be, I really want that, and it has to be exactly what I want at this moment. I did have a little extra spending money, but I wasn't sure how long it was going to last, and there was other stuff that I was going to want to get. So my entertainment money, I was going to be really careful with my entertainment money. And I looked it up online. The retro, or I should say the Super Retro Trio by Retrobit, when I looked it up online, it did Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis games and Nintendo Entertainment System games very well. It was an excellent recreation of those three game systems. It looked beautiful. Just a great video games clone console. And I stand by that, sort of, but I don't recommend buying one. And one of the best things about, one thing I thought was really cool, is you could use the original Nintendo Entertainment System controllers, Super Nintendo controllers, and Sega Genesis controllers. But there was a switch that made one of those game systems controllers the default system that you could control all three from. And it was Sega Genesis, which to me was the best idea. For one thing, the Sega Genesis used the old Universal, I think they call it the DE9 ports, which it was a great setup. Both Atari and Sega, and Coleco, and a lot of computers from the time used those ports for hooking up video game controllers. It's worth mentioning, I didn't say 3DO right away. The 3DO has the same shape ports, and technically you can jam a Sega Genesis or Atari 2600 controller in a 3DO Systems controller port. Never do it. Never do it. The 3DO works on a different voltage. The risk of damaging your controller definitely exists. The risk of damaging the 3DO is seriously likely. You'll end up fucking both your controller and the 3DO if you try plugging Atari or Sega or Commodore or whatever controllers in the 3DO. Only use 3DO products with the 3DO. But with Sega, Coleco, Atari, you could swap a lot of their controllers without problem. That was pretty cool. So using the Sega Genesis control port seemed like a really good idea. And Sega Genesis controllers are easy to come by. And of those three systems, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, yeah, Sega Genesis had the best controllers. But that is my opinion. The D-pads were way better on the Sega Genesis controllers compared to Super Nintendo. The button layouts, closer buttons that are lined out in a more logical and easy to access positioning. The Sega Genesis controllers, in my opinion, were the better controllers. So knowing that this game system would let me plug a controller into the Sega Genesis control port and possibly control Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo games with it, as well as the Sega Genesis games, to me, that was a big selling point. I already have all kinds of Sega Genesises and Super Nintendo. I have, well, 2 Super Nintendos and a whole bunch of Sega Genesises and Nintendo Entertainment System. You know, it was all fine and good. But that was a big selling point for me. And the simple fact is, although I did just praise the Sega Genesis controller over the other controllers, the Super Nintendo controller actually was a pretty good controller too. And certain games were going to have a layout that just were going to work better with that controller. I was looking forward to playing the Illusion of Gaia with a Sega Genesis controller, which is really fucking cool, actually. It's great to play Illusion of Gaia with a Sega Genesis controller. But that said, Cybernator. The certain buttons that you end up pressing at the same time. You don't want to play Cybernator with a Sega Genesis controller. The SN Pro Pad works great with the Cybernator because it still has the shoulder buttons, and it's just way more convenient to have those shoulder buttons because you just don't want to. There's certain button combinations. For example, on the Sega Genesis, you don't really want a button combination where you have to press A and Z at the same time. It'd be kind of like pressing, what would it be, B and Y on the... Each controller has button combinations where they're at kind of like opposite ends. And with Cybernator, you switch over to the Genesis controller, and just the button combinations are not what you want anymore. It's a matter of button location when you end up putting the shoulder buttons down in part of the row of 3. It's just a matter of the way the games are organized. But Cybernator, yeah, you want a Super Nintendo controller for Cybernator, or something like the SN Pro Pad, which gives you the rows of the 2 rows of 3 buttons like a Genesis controller. But you can also program the shoulder buttons to fill in for the buttons that you might not want to use in the same way, or as part of those row of 3. Excuse me. Well, in addition to the fact you can play Super Nintendo games with Super Nintendo controllers anyway, on that system, that came with a Sega Genesis compatible controller that was Super Nintendo style. So it's easy to get your hands on a Genesis controller, but also it came with a Super Nintendo styled Genesis controller. Which, the first thing I thought of is like, wow, I'll be able to play Illusion of Gaia with the Sega Genesis controller on this thing, plug a Sega Genesis controller in it. But the Genesis compatible Super Nintendo controller that comes with it, that's a great novelty. I'll probably plug that into my Atari 2600 and play Defender with a Super Nintendo controller. You know, just the weird combinations that came from it. It was the best of both worlds. Right out of the box, a Super Nintendo styled controller, but Genesis controller compatible for all 3 game systems. Awesome! That was so fucking perfect. That was like the greatest novelty ever when it comes to control options for retro games. And I absolutely love that. And previously they made good knockoff Super Nintendo controllers for the Retro Duo. The Genesis styled controllers that come with the Super Retro I shouldn't say Genesis styled. The Super Nintendo styled Genesis compatible controllers that came with the Super Retro Trio actually felt better than Nintendo's own. And that almost never happens. These bastards at Retrobit were capable of really fucking awesome quality. And the fact that those 3 game systems, Nintendo Entertainment System, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, play as well in this thing as they did, when I saw all the reviews, all the video clips online of it, I had to have this device. It was way too fucking awesome. So I ordered a brand new fucking one. I got the red and black one because I got the white and blue Retro Duo. It was time for to get a red and black model. I got it. I got a brand new one. It was such a great thing that if it turned out to be really good, I was thinking I'd buy other ones just to have the more controllers, and if it ever wears out or anything happens to it, I'd have more of them. You know, I actually wanted more than one of it. Like, it seemed like it would be the perfect thing I could purchase. It just looked like the retro gaming device that I wanted more than anything else. It looked so awesome, and I ordered it, and I opened the box, and I was fucking disappointed right from the start. I didn't have a lot of time to play around with it, but the first thing, when I got mine, even though the box, if you looked on the box, it had the picture of the ability to switch it over where it says Genesis and play from the Genesis control ports, nope. It said SNES on that side of the switch on the one that I got, which made me go, what? Why would they do that? They had such a cool option. And it came with what looked like Super Nintendo controllers, cloned Super Nintendo controllers, which I didn't actually find any better than the Retro Duo's controllers. If I would go back and forth between the two, I'm like, they're both seem good, they both feel good. It came with Super Nintendo controllers. I didn't have a lot of time to play around with it, but the one thing I had wanted to do with it, the great feature of being able to control all those games from the Sega Genesis control port, plus a Genesis compatible Super Nintendo style controller, all that flushed down the toilet when all I got was, yeah, some more Super Nintendo controllers And like that really disappointed me. As soon as I opened the box, I was like, I pissed away how much money on this fucking thing? And like that severely disappointed me. And the fact that they would change something that much at the last minute, and it doesn't even say it on the box. And granted, I ordered it online, so it would also be up to the online sellers to promote that fact. But you never know the difference anyway. That, to me, that was shitty. That was bad. What was even worse is I wouldn't be able to plug in an the SN6 or whatever it's called. I got one here somewhere. It's down here, but I don't know. I wouldn't even be able to plug in this great Super Nintendo controller here for the Genesis games. I could still use the Genesis controller for the Genesis games, you know, flick the switch to that option. But I still couldn't use this for it. Because when you switch it to play all the games from the Super Nintendo control port, it's not compatible with Super Nintendo controllers when playing Genesis games. Not all the buttons work. It just doesn't work properly. Even worse, the Super Nintendo clone controllers that came with it, unlike the controllers that came with the Retro Duo, are not compatible with Super Nintendo games. And when I say those controllers that came with it weren't compatible with Super Nintendo games, I don't just mean they're not compatible with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. You can plug it into a Super Nintendo, but the same things that it does on the Super Nintendo with Super Nintendo games is the exact same fucking thing that those controllers do on the Super Retro Trio with Super Nintendo games. And that is not play Super Nintendo games properly. The buttons are severely fucked up. Like, you press one button, it acts like two different buttons are flickering in turbo mode. The changes they made to the controller worked fine for Sega Genesis games, but this new setup worked shitty for Super Nintendo games, and this was a Super Nintendo clone controller. They fucked up big time. Although it did have the bonus that it now recognized some of the buttons as turbo if you use it with the Nintendo Entertainment System games. So I suppose that could be considered a minor improvement, but nothing compared to the fact it came with controllers that would not work with Super Nintendo games, even though they were Super Nintendo styled controllers and now had the Super Nintendo plug on the end of them. That was severely fucked up. But also, there was a downgrade in audio for both Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. Most of the time, be it emulators or clone consoles, Super Nintendo audio turns out alright. Sega Genesis is really hit or miss. The Sega Genesis had an awesome sound chip, but a lot of the times, most of the time when you get a clone console, sometimes even the licensed one, that audio chip sucks. It just doesn't do the original games justice. It's often horrible. And the same thing went for emulation. I think it was something like 2005 or 2007 before I actually found a Sega Genesis emulator that could get the sound fucking right on a computer. So, the fact that it had screwed up Genesis sound, this was not the product I saw reviewed online. This was a shitty downgrade of the product. It no longer did Super Nintendo or Genesis games adequately, and it no longer let you play the games from the Sega Genesis control port. It didn't, you know, you could only play Genesis games with the Genesis control port, or the Super Nintendo control port now, but the controllers that came with it were only really... Anyway, I'm repeating myself on that, but it was a downgrade all around. It didn't play the games as well as the earlier model. And I was pissed. I viewed it as a waste of my fucking money, but I wanted the original one that I saw everybody had online. So I went on eBay, I found a used one, and for about the same price, because of shipping and all that, and blah, 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 whatever, for pretty much the same price, I bought a used one. And the used one was the exact same thing everybody online had reviewed, and the used one that I have now is right up there somewhere, right nearby the bad one. It's actually one of the best retro game systems I could possibly get my hands on. The used version, the older version, which I ended up spending money on again just to get what I wanted, but I got a used one, I consider that to be one of the greatest devices ever made for retro gaming. It really truly is. It's everything I hoped it would have been. A great Super Nintendo styled controller that plugs into any Genesis or Atari 2600. and the fact that you can use Genesis controllers with it as the main controller for all 3 game systems. I love playing Nintendo Entertainment System games with the Genesis controller. Finally got to play Illusion of Gaia with a Sega Genesis controller. That was awesome. You know, it was great. The original model, the earlier model, the one that I bought used, I consider to be one of the greatest devices ever made by any retro gaming company. I very much approve of it. And if I could guarantee that you were going to get a new one in box, I'd say run out to Retrobit and get one. But what replaced it with the bad controllers, the bad gameplay, I do not recommend you take a chance on the Super Retro Trio unless there's some sort of confirmation from Retrobit that it's the earlier good version of it, or they made updates to somehow improve it. You know what? If they wanted to do away with controlling things from the Genesis control port, they should have added some USB controller ports. That actually would have been kind of cool. But I haven't gotten to that yet. Once I start coughing, I just can't stop. So anyway, did it stop me from ever buying anything from Retrobit again? Not really. Something far cheaper than one of those consoles for 12 bucks. I saw the RetroGen controllers, and I saw these reviewed online. One review, the person who got one, the D-pad was crooked, and other than that, it was acceptable, but kind of a crappy controller. Somebody else got one with the proper D-pad. It was on straight, but it lacked the mode button. And for 12 bucks, I wanted to try one and see what it was like. And it's the one that I got, which was more recent than the reviews that I saw online for it, of course, because I had already seen those reviews and I had bought it new. It's actually a good controller. The only downside is, like a lot of cloned Genesis controllers, it's just a hint smaller than the Sega Genesis 6-button controller, but it's the same basic shape, very close, very good. The buttons are a little bit more rattly, but it's a great copy, other than it's a little bit smaller. So the slightly larger original version by Sega, it feels a little bit better when you're clicking the mode button, because you kind of want the controller to be a little bit bigger than that. But that said, the difference in size isn't enough to make a big difference. In fact, I plugged it into the good version of the Super Retro Trio, and I use it a lot. It's just my Super Retro, Retrobit combination, whatever. So actually, this was a good purchase again. After buying that brand new Super Retro Trio that Super Retro sucked, I bought something from Retrobit that was really good. Really good. And then I saw this online, and there's nothing in the package right now. It's over there somewhere, or is it over there? Oh, actually it's in plain sight. It's a USB controller that's Sega Saturn style. And let's just see if there we go. This is a great controller. Yeah, look for my video reviewing it. This is a great controller. And it feels very close to the Saturn's original. And I used it. And if you don't need analog sticks... Yes, I changed location. Yeah, it seems weird, but I didn't want to take the time to put the camera back on the tripod again. I wanted to get this video over with. I ran out of battery power in the other camera, as well as this camera. I'd been doing a lot of playing around with the camera earlier today, and the other camera just didn't have a good charge in it. So anyway, I didn't want to mess around with the tripod. There's a little shelf right there. Camera's on the shelf. Lazy, easy way to finish this video off. Just want to get this video over with. And what I have to say is, when I got that great USB Sega Saturn style controller, saying the words right here, gotta say the words right, pronouncing. When I got that great USB controller that was Sega Saturn styled for, you know, personal computers, I thought to myself, it looks like that would be compatible with, you know, other USB controlled devices, or other devices that use USB controllers, such as the the Retrobit Generations, which was a device that had not yet come out, and I thought it'd be kind of cool. I could swap its Sega Genesis style USB controllers with the Saturn ones, and I'd have a whole bunch of USB controllers. I just thought that'd be kind of cool. I don't know if that's possible, if their controllers are unique in a way, but it uses USB ports for their controllers on the Retrobit generations. And to me, that's actually pretty cool. That's a pretty cool option with all the different controllers you can get that are USB style. Good idea, Retrobit. Personally, I'd rather they went with the old Universal style Atari and Sega always used. But hey, good idea. Hey, maybe future versions of the Super Retro Trio might have a USB port. But anyway, to finish this off, as I was interested very much in the Retrobit generations, even more so than the NES Mini. Though I do find the NES Mini kind of interesting. I'm not like, oh, I gotta get one, run out and get one, you know. The Retrobit generations look very interesting to me, and I'm still interested in it, but the early reviews, it looks like not only is the Super Nintendo emulation off, apparently emulation or whatever chips it has in it to recreate the Super Nintendo, I'm not sure, but the Super Nintendo gameplay appears to be off, the speeds play weird, and the Nintendo Entertainment side of things, they didn't get sound right. Not getting sound right on the Nintendo Entertainment System, in this day and age, wouldn't that be incredibly easy? It just looks like it doesn't play games all that well. It's far from perfect. So all these unique games that I kind of want to play on it, basically it went down the list. I'm not in a hurry to get it. I do want to get it, and if I do, I'll review it, but I'm less encouraged to get the Retrobit Generations console, because it looks like quality isn't there. And, well, at least the quality's not there, it's right from the start. As opposed to the Super Retro Trio, which the earlier versions had great quality, then later versions turned to shit. So, I'm skeptical, I'm not mispronounced my word as I try to get through skeptical. I'm skeptical of what I'll get if I get a Retrobit Generations, but I am interested in it, and I'm not going to tell people not to get one. I'm also not going to tell people not to get the Super Retro Trio, but I only recommend it. I only actually recommend it if you can guarantee you're going to get one of the good versions. And I really don't know how many versions are out there, but the one that I got that was made in late 2014, that one was pretty good. I think that one was one of the best video game devices ever made, but it was the more recent model that I had purchased brand new was complete crap. Oh, the car came. I no longer have the house to myself. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and yeah, that's my opinions on Retrobit. A great company, and sometimes a horribly crappy company. Most companies you can say that about. Okay, there was one thing I forgot to mention. The RetroGen adapter. I got a RetroGen adapter. I've talked about it in other videos as well as this one. Well, I forgot to talk about it in this one. It's an interesting device. I like it. It's pretty cool. And I recommend looking into it, and you can check out some of my other videos talking about it. As for this video, yeah, the date in the title is the date I originally recorded all of this, or at least all the parts where I'm on camera. I figured within a day or two I would have it edited and uploaded, so the date was mainly going to represent the point that I recorded this at. But unfortunately, unfortunate things happened in real life, and I didn't feel up to editing videos for a little while. I just didn't get around to it, and now I finally got around to uploading this video, and hopefully you enjoyed it. I really appreciate it if people click like on the videos, and I also appreciate it if they check out some of my other videos and click like on those ones as well. But just end this with saying there are other videos where I've talked about Retrobit, and feel free to take a look at some of those videos, and feel free to take a look at anything I may have produced that you might find interesting. There's a lot of other videos out there.